Hello everyone, it's Rabbi Akiva Males and I hope you're well. Today is Friday, it is September 25th. We're getting ready for Shabbos Parshas Hazinu, more commonly known as Shabbos Shuvah. This is going to be a very different Shabbos Shuvah. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic, we're not able to gather in person and share with one another, uplift one another with our learning the way we normally do. And God willing, each and every one of us will find a way to compensate. We should find a way, despite the fact we can't get together as a group, to still bring some of that Torah learning into our homes, into our lives over the course of the Shabbos, find a way to uplift ourselves and our families through the power of Hashem's Torah using whatever means we have at our disposal. I want to share with you some Divrei Torah today that are a little bit different. And as we said, it's Parshas Hazinu, it's also Shabbos Shuvah. And I wanted to share a message that perhaps could work for us for Shabbos Shuvah as well. As you know, over the last couple of years, I've spent a good deal of time researching some of the events that occurred in Hebron in 1929. In the summer of 1929 in Hebron was the tragic, the horrible Hebron massacre in which 67 Jews were butchered by frenzied Arab mobs. Amongst them were 25 students in Yeshivas Knesset Yisrael, which was the branch of the Slobodka Yeshiva that had opened in Hebron several years earlier. Amongst them were several Americans, including Memphis' own Dave Schoenberg, Hashem Yikom Damav. One aspect of that Hebron massacre I had never really looked into before or thought of or seen anything about. I just read this past, I'd say the past 2 weeks or so. And that is what occurred that first Rosh Hashanah. Think about this. The Hebron massacre occurred on the 18th of Av in Tarpat, the summer of 1929. 6 weeks later is Rosh Hashanah. So the survivors of the Hebron Yeshiva find themselves in Yerushalayim, where they've relocated to temporary quarters, and they've all gathered to daven and bring in Rosh Hashanah together. Normally a very festive time, but it's a terrible time. The tension is in the air. There's grieving, there's trauma, there's people who are broken. So many of their friends have been maimed, injured, wounded, killed, butchered, terrible. Everybody is broken. And they're gathered in their temporary quarters and they're waiting to start the davening of Rosh Hashanah, which is usually so festive. And there's just such a terrible feeling of doom and gloom in the room. The mashkiach, the tzaddik Rabbi Chasman, gets up from his seat as it's time to begin Marav. He looks at his watch, it's time, and he starts to walk around the Beis Medrash, and all eyes are on him. And he stops at the stender of a bacher, of a young student, whose name is Betzalel Shikavitsky. And he stops and he says, Rabbi Betzalel, we'd like you to daven Marav. Betzalel, he objects. He says, what do you mean? I'm a bacher, I'm very young. He says, I can't do this. There are people older than me, wiser than me. There are such Talmidei Chachamim here. Why am I going to lead Marav? And Rabbi Chasman says, Betzalel, we'd like you to lead Marav. And Betzalel, what's he going to do? He's going to argue with the mashkiach. So he reluctantly goes up to the shulchan, to the amud, and he puts on a talis. And he begins Baruch Hu, in that festive tone that's reserved for Rosh Hashanah and for the Moadim. It's just not there. The feeling's not in the room. They go through the first paragraph of Marav. And he concludes it, where he says again, where he's davening, may the living and enduring Hashem continuously reign over us. And everyone answers Amen, but it's just not there. And he starts the second paragraph of Marav, which is Avas Olam, describes the love that Hashem has for Klal Yisrael, that all-enduring love that Hashem has for us as his Am HaNivchar. And as Betzalel is reading this, he just starts to become very emotional. And he gets to the closing sentence of that paragraph, and he begins to recite it in the fashion that everyone does on Rosh Hashanah. That he begs Hashem, we know you love us, and that love that you have for us should never depart for all eternity. But he can't make it through that sentence. And he breaks down, he just starts crying. After all they've been through 6 weeks earlier in that pogrom, everybody starts crying. This becomes a release for everybody. The whole room, the whole yeshiva, they're crying along with Betzalel. And he tries again. And he loses it. The whole yeshiva is crying along with him. And he starts a third time, V'yavascha, and the whole yeshiva joins in with him. He can't get through it. This goes on 3, 4, 5, 6 times. He's trying to get through that final sentence, telling Hashem, we know you love us, and we're begging you, don't ever let that love depart from us. And the whole yeshiva is singing it together. They're chanting it together. It becomes almost like a Musar Seder, that they're all chanting this mantra together, and they're all crying. Everybody is emotional. Everyone is in tears. And the Sefer that brings this down says, he's spoken to numerous alumni. At this point, there are most of, I can't imagine there's anyone left, who had been there that Rosh Hashanah. And he says no one had an exact memory of how many times this went on. But it went on tens of times. Everyone together, chanting that, reciting that together, and crying together. This emotional was like the spigot had just been opened, and the tears were flowing. And finally, after numerous attempts, they finally made it through. Baruch atah Hashem ohev amo Yisrael. And they bless HaKadosh Baruch Hu, acknowledging, we know that you love Klal Yisrael. And some of the survivors who had been there that Maariv, they all said at this point, this is when the Hebron Yeshiva was reborn. After that trauma that they experienced 6 weeks earlier, so many people were just walking around with this. They hadn't had a chance to, you might say, process it, let their emotions out. Finally, that Rosh Hashanah night, they all came out and everyone was in tears, crying and saying over and over again together, affirming, reaffirming that Hashem loves us. We don't know why this all occurred. We don't know why such a tragedy could occur, but we know that Hashem loves us. Whereas Aman Nivchar, he loves us collectively as his chosen people, and he loves us individually as being children of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Each and every one of us are descendants of such nobility. HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves us. And they said this was so reaffirming for them, and this is what gave them the strength to go on. The Sefer brings down, by the way, that after Maariv concludes, everyone went to go shake the hands of the Rabbeim in the yeshiva. And when this Bitzalel, when he got to Reb Leib Chasman, Reb Leib gave him a very warm handshake and told him, this is exactly what I intended. That's why we chose you. We knew you're emotional. We knew you've got a good voice. We knew you could do this for us. We needed this, and we thank you very much. What a powerful story. I had never seen this before. I was so happy that I saw it in a Sefer this year. But I think this idea is so true. What gives us the strength to go on when we're dealing with adversity is this idea, knowing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ohev Amo Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves Klal Yisrael. We may not see it. We may not experience it. But we know that he loves us, and that gives us the strength to go on. These last 6 months and more have been so trying for us. All of us have brothers and sisters in different parts of the world that are experiencing the pandemic far worse than what we are. Whether it's in Israel, New York, New Jersey, other places, they're experienced it worse, and they are experiencing it worse. And Hashem should change that immediately. But nonetheless, even though they've experienced it worse, we're also suffering. This has disrupted our lives. This has disrupted our routines. Our world has been turned upside down. What could give us the strength to go on until this situation changes? And we hope it changes soon. What can give us the strength to go on is knowing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Ohev Amo Yisrael. Hashem loves us. And even though we may not see him in our lives right now, and even though we're experiencing such hardship, knowing that Hashem loves us can make it feasible to make it through this intact. How can we recognize Hashem's love for us? I believe one of the ways that we can tangibly notice Hashem's love for us is when we have our eyes and ears open and we're receptive, and we can spot hashgacha pratis, divine intervention in our lives. When we can feel God's hand on our shoulders, and it's a reminder, I'm here with you. And here's something, it's an experience that I want to remind you that I'm here with you. That reminds us that Hashem loves us, and that can give us the strength that we need to go on. I want to share with you an incredible piece of hashgacha pratis that I experienced together with Layla recently. And this gave me a lot of chizuk. I hope it can give you some chizuk as well. I'm going to go to share screen because I think it'll be more powerful if you actually see this. Okay, as you all know, I'm privileged to teach in the mornings. I'm privileged to teach Torah at the Cooper Yeshiva High School for Boys. This year I'm teaching Chumash to the boys, and also on Fridays, I'm teaching Parsha to both the boys and the girls. I learn with the boys, and then I go to the girls' school to learn at the GMSG, Goldie Margolin School for Girls. A few weeks ago, it was Parshas Nitzavim Vayelech. It was September 11th that Friday. And after pausing and recognizing, of course, that auspicious date, I wanted to share with them something that I realized was going to be Sunday. Sunday, the 13th of September, was also the 24th of Elul, which was the Chafetz Chaim's yahrzeit. So I said, if it's going to be the Chafetz Chaim's yahrzeit, let's learn something from the Chafetz Chaim, a thought that he shared, and also something about his life that we can perhaps emulate, and that'll be a terrific way to remember him. So I found something on Parshas that week, Parshas Nitzavim Vayelech, a comment from the Chafetz Chaim, and here I want to share it with you. The comment was as follows. It's in Nitzavim at the beginning. The pasuk says, "Hanistaros laHashem Elokeinu," that items which are hidden, that's God's business. Vaniglos, but matters which are revealed, lanu levaneinu, that's the responsibility of us and our children, ad olam, for all generations, lasos is kol divrei haTorah azos, to uphold, to keep, to observe all the Torah and all the mitzvahs. So the Chafetz Chaim famously darshaned on those words, lanu levaneinu. I have them bolded there. If you look at them, there's something very unique about them. There's dots, there's nekudos on top of those words. And in all the Torah, we know that there is normally no marks of punctuation or vowelization written in a Sefer Torah. There's just the letters. There's no trup, there's no cantillation marks, there's just the letters. There are some exceptions. One of the exceptions is right here in Nitzavim. Above the words, Lanu Levaneinu, there are nekudos, there are dots. And our Mefarshim jump on this. What is that for? Why do we have such a Masorah? Why does this tradition exist? What was this message being sent? And the Chafetz Chaim had his explanation. He says as follows. He says, if you're writing a letter to a friend, if you're sending a communication to someone, and you want to emphasize a certain point, what do? We find a way to make that typeface, those words, different than all the surrounding words. If we're typing, we might type those in capitalization. We might bold it, we might italicize it, we might underline it. And the Chafetz Chaim says that these nekudos on top of the word levaneinu, that's exactly what's going on. We're saying this is a big deal, levaneinu. This is a pasuk that's saying it's our responsibility to make sure that the Torah is upheld and that the Torah is observed with all of its mitzvahs. That's a big deal. But where in that pasuk do we really have to emphasize levaneinu for our children? Because the Chafetz Chaim was saying our primary obligation, if we want Klal Yisrael to endure, if we want to make certain that the Torah will be passed from one generation to the next, we have to be certain that our children of our community, our own children of Klal Yisrael, they're receiving a quality Jewish, a Torah education. And that's how we can make certain that ad olam, that for all generations, the words of the Torah and all the mitzvahs will be lived, they will be observed. It's our responsibility, I told the children. The Chafetz Chaim was so big on this. He would go around Europe as much as he could, emphasizing how important it was for communities to provide for the children of their communities a Jewish, a quality Torah education. And he would emphasize that it has to be a great education where kids will not just learn intellectually, but they'll also be excited about Torah and mitzvahs. They'll learn that being involved, living a life of Torah and mitzvahs will enrich them. It'll enhance their lives. It won't, God forbid, be a burden. It'll enhance their lives. And this was so important to him. So I told the students, you're all here in school, and you're enjoying a good Jewish education. You've got teachers who love you. They're doing everything they can to promote Torah observance, mitzvah observance, and to give over a passion for Yiddishkeit. This is beautiful. And this is exactly what the Chafetz Chaim was emphasizing in Levaneinu. They put the dots on it. This is so important. And Ashracha, you're all so fortunate that you're experiencing exactly what it is that he was emphasizing. I then shared with them that, hey, I think I saw an amazing Hashgacha Pratis. That same week, as I said, I'm teaching Chumash to the kids. I'm learning Parshas Vayishlach with them now. And in Vayishlach, as far as I know, this is the only other incident in the Torah where there's nekudos on top of the words like this. In the episode where Esav and Yaakov finally reunite, after 20 years being Yaakov being away at Lavan's house. So the pasuk says that Esav fell on Yaakov's neck, Vayishakeyu, and he kissed him, Vayibchu, and they cried together. So above the word Vayishakeyu, if you look there, it's bolded. Again, there's nekudos. So I told the kids, wow, this is such hashgacha pratis. Look at this, that the same week that we're talking about, there's one word here, and it's Nitzavim Vayelach. You learned the other one in Parshas Vayishlach. How cool is that? That's what I pointed out to the kids. And I thought hashgacha pratis ended there. But no, I want to share with you how it just gets more incredible. After sharing this Dvar Torah of the Chafetz Chaim on Ulevanenu, the nekudos, the dots on top of Ulevanenu, I said, I want to share with you one more item. The Chafetz Chaim had a Talmud Muvak. He had a very devoted disciple by the name of Rav Elchanan Wasserman, who unfortunately was murdered by the Nazis in the Holocaust. And Rav Elchanan writes, I found the eulogy that he delivered for the Chafetz Chaim in his yeshiva in Baranovich, and in one paragraph he says, What made the Chafetz Chaim very, very unique, there are many Torah scholars, but what made the Chafetz Chaim very unique was that from a very young age, he would take whatever Torah learning that he had absorbed and said, okay, how can I now apply this to my routine, to my life? How can I take what I learned, make sure it's not just intellectual, but that it's going to apply to how I conduct myself in this world? That made him very, very unique. That's what the Chafetz Chaim said. So I encouraged the kids. I said, let's do the same. We're privileged to be in school. As we said in Levanena, we're getting a beautiful Jewish education. But let's not just take that information and leave it in our notebooks so we'll get good grades on exams and great grades on our report cards. Let's take that Torah knowledge and let's apply it to our lives and our routines. And if we could do that, we'll be emulating the Chafetz Chaim, and this is such a great thing to do, specifically in this time going into the new year, and specifically with the Chafetz Chaim's yard site. What a great, great thing to do. That was my message to the kids. And I'd said to them, I want to give you one example what I decided to do, what me and my wife Layla, what we've done, is that we learned in Vayishlach, so we learned a Cheskuni together, one of the Mefarshim, that's explained what's the story. Just because Yaakov was wounded and was limping, we're not allowed to eat the Gid Anasha, we're not allowed to eat that tendon or that nerve, that part of the animal, and the only way the hindquarters can be eaten is if it's trabered, if it's porged, if that sinew is carefully removed from there. What is going on? And the Cheskuni says it's a knas, it's a penalty. Is that Bnei Yisrael did something wrong. They left Yaakov all alone to fend for himself, to cross that river and go get his belongings. They should have accompanied him. They should have been there to back him up and be his protection. And because he was left all alone, that's why he was jumped by that attacker, by the Sar Shal Esav, and he was wounded. So to send a message to Klal Yisrael for thousands of years that we should never leave another Jew to fend for him or herself, that's why we refrain from the Gid Anasha. It's a constant reminder is that we always have to be there for our fellow Jews. No one should ever be made to feel that they're all alone. So I told the students, look, we learned that in class, but I didn't want that to remain intellectual. I said, how can I apply that? So I said, as follows, Rosh Hashanah is coming. We're going to send Rosh Hashanah cards. My wife and I, we're going to strategize. We have a list of people who we know might be feeling lonely on a regular year, but specifically this year, when there's so much isolation going on. They could be older people. They could be widows, widowers. They could be people who are just so lonely. And we're going to make certain that amongst the other Rosh Hashanah cards we sent to friends and family, we're going to reach out and we're going to let them know that they're not forgotten. And one of the Rosh Hashanah cards that I had sent out, that Layla and I had sent out, was to a wonderful, wonderful old elderly woman who lives in Pennsylvania. I'm going to the next page. As you know, Layla and I lived in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for 9 years before we relocated to Memphis in the summer of 2016. And there was such a lovely woman, an older woman who lived in a small town close to Harrisburg, and she would often come for Shabbos or come to our shul for davening on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And whenever we saw her in shul, very often we would walk over to her and say, Mrs. So-and-so, it's so nice to see you. You're already here. Can we invite you back to our home for a Shabbos lunch, for a Yom Tov meal, whatever it may be? You're already here. Come walk over to our house. You're here, and we'd love for you to grace our table and to share a Yom Tov, a Shabbos with us. And very often she would join us. She was such a sweet, sweet, very grandmotherly type woman. And so we made sure just to send her a card. She shouldn't feel forgotten at this time. And this all occurs like a week after I shared this with the students, and I want to share it with you now. This is incredible. A week later, we get this card in return. So there you see, there's the card. I have my thumb over her address label. No reason to disclose her identity. And there's her handwriting. She wrote this card to us. It's a standard Rosh Hashanah card about the new year should be filled with peace and health. Lashana Tova, Tichtavu, Tichtamu. And let's look at the next page where it's what she hand wrote. So dear, on top of the card, dear Rabbi and Layla, there's the card should be filled with peace, prosperity, and health. Here's her words. Thank you so very much for thinking of me at this very difficult time. I'm taking this virus very seriously, especially considering my age. I'm thankful, last page, for each good day, and we all have to pray to stay well, healthy, and safe, and for that terrible virus to leave us very soon. I miss seeing you. With all my love and best wishes, get ready for this, always for a healthy, happy, and peaceful new year. Shana Tova, Tichtavu, Tichtamu, Shalom, my thumb over her name. Look at the words healthy and peaceful. She obviously wanted to emphasize the words healthy and peaceful, but how did she do it? She didn't put it all in capital letters. She didn't italicize it. She didn't bold it. She didn't underline it. She put dots. She put those nakudos there. How incredible. When I get this, I just started smiling ear to ear. I said, this is exactly what the Chafetz Chaim's point was. The Chafetz Chaim's point was, why is our Masorah, why is our tradition that there are Nekudos by Levanenu? That's a way of emphasizing it. It's almost underlining it, saying this is a big deal. This is important. And if you ever were wondering, come on, does anyone do that in a letter? Here it is. Here is this beautiful old elderly woman. She's sending Layla and I a Rosh Hashanah card, and she wants to emphasize her brachos for us for New Year's, for health and peace. And what does she do to emphasize it? She puts the dots. Exactly what the Chafetz Chaim said the Nekudos are doing by Levanenu. That's how you emphasize something, with the dots. And here I have a living example, someone who's doing this. Healthy and peaceful. That's the greatest brachos that we could wish someone in the new year. We all need health. With this virus going, we want this pandemic to end as soon as possible. And we all need peace. We all need shalom. Chazal tell us that's why the bracha of shalom is the final bracha of Shemona Esrei. Because without shalom, we're left with nothing. We could have been given all the other brachas, but if there's no shalom, what's it worth? It's like putting water into a bucket that's got holes in it. It's going to all seep out. Without shalom, it's nothing. These are the greatest brachas that any of us could be blessed with in this year. Health and peace. Brius, health and peace, shalom. That's what we need. And I think this is such a beautiful idea. So again, to tie this all together, this week is Shabbos Shuvah. It's important as we're going through this very, very difficult, traumatic time. And we have been challenged incredibly in these last 6+ months. We have to remember that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Ohev Amo Yisrael. He loves us. He loves Klal Yisrael. Even though it's hard to see it in the midst of challenging times, what keeps us sane is that we know He loves us. And if we're ever really searching, how can we really find that love? Let's look for Hashgacha Pratis. Let's look for Hashgacha. Let's look for divine intervention and divine footprint in our life. Let's look for that hand on our shoulder. When we feel it, if we keep our eyes open, our ears open, our antennas up, we can feel that divine hand on our shoulder. And that can give us the chizuk, that can give us the strength that we need. And let's remember what the Chafetz Chaim said about those dots. The dots are a way to emphasize something is important. It was on Levanenu to tell us, making certain that our kids are receiving a Torah education is a big deal. That's crucial for Klal Yisrael. Making certain that the children are excited about Yiddishkeit, that they realize that Torah mitzvahs enhance and enrich their lives. That's huge. That's a very, very big deal. And what made the Chafetz Chaim unique was that he realized that the Torah I learned should not just be intellectual knowledge. It has to come into my daily life and daily routine. So we have to find ways to do that as well. And let's remember one very practical way. Let's reach out to others who are feeling alone during these very challenging times. Let's reach out to them and let them know they're not forgotten. Let's let them know that we love them and that we care about them. And we know that Hashem operates in a fashion of midah keneged midah, measure for measure. If we're going out of our way in challenging times to reach out to someone else and let them know that we love them and we care about them, they're not forgotten. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should do the same to us. Hashem should reach out to us in these challenging times and let us know in a very tangible way that He loves us, that He cares about us, and that we're not forgotten. We should feel His hand on our shoulder. We should feel that reassurance. We should feel that Hashgacha Pratis. In the zechus, in the merit of each and every one of us trying to look out for others, especially those who are vulnerable. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu respond to all of our tefillos, all of our heartfelt prayers that we've been offering so far in this season and that we're going to continue to offer in the coming week. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu answer and respond to all of our prayers. And He should bless each and every one of us and our families with a year that's filled with health, it's filled with peace, it's filled with prosperity. Each and every one of us should be sealed in His Sefer Chaim Tovim, in His book of good life. May HaKadosh Baruch Hu respond to all of our tefillos. I wish each and every one a good Shabbos.